She was ignored by her husband, until a short dress made the millionaire explode in pure jealousy. Before we explore all the details of this incredible story, tell us where you're following us from and the time. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss a thing, and let's embark on this journey together. She knew she was becoming a ghost in her own home, but tonight, that would change. Camilla Johnson stood before her bedroom mirror, her reflection showing a woman who had learned to make herself smaller with each passing month. At 28, her rich brown skin still glowed with the same warmth that had captivated Adrian Stone 3 years ago, but her dark eyes held a weariness that seemed to deepen with each ignored good morning and each dinner eaten alone. Her natural hair was pulled back into a sleek low bun, professional and understated, the way Adrian preferred for business events. She wore a conservative navy dress that reached her knees, carefully chosen to blend into the background of yet another corporate gathering. The reflection staring back at her was polished, appropriate, and utterly forgettable. Perfect, she whispered to herself, though the word tasted bitter on her tongue. The sound of expensive leather shoes echoed from the marble hallway of their penthouse. Adrian was home, 30 minutes before they needed to leave for the Meridian Capital Investors Gala, a rare occurrence that used to make her heart flutter. Now it barely registered as noteworthy. "Camilla?" His voice carried the same clipped efficiency he used with his assistants. "In the bedroom," she called back, applying a final touch of nude lipstick. Adrian Stone appeared in the doorway, 6 feet 2 inches of controlled power, wrapped in a perfectly tailored charcoal suit. His steel-grey eyes swept over her appearance with the same cursory attention he might give a quarterly report. Functional, adequate, approved. "You look fine," he said, already pulling out his phone to check emails. "The car will be here in 20 minutes. I need to make a quick call to Singapore before we leave." Fine. The word hung in the air like a physical blow. When was the last time he had called her beautiful? When was the last time he had really looked at her? Not through her, not past her, but at her. "Adrian," she said softly, turning from the mirror. "Do you remember our wedding day?" His fingers paused over his phone screen. "What about it? You said I was the most beautiful woman you'd ever seen. You said you'd never get tired of looking at me." Something flickered across his face, too quick to identify. Guilt? Regret? Or perhaps just impatience? "That was 3 years ago, Camilla. We're married now. We don't need to play those games anymore." Games? He thought their romance had been games. "Right," she nodded, her voice steady despite the crack forming in her chest. "Silly me." Adrian's phone buzzed, and his attention was already shifting back to the screen. "The Yamamoto deal is falling through. I might need to step out of the gala early to handle this." Of course he would. The gala was supposed to be their first public appearance together in months, and he was already planning his escape. "Whatever you need to do," Camilla said, moving toward their walk-in closet. "Good. I knew you'd understand. You always do." His voice was already distant as he walked away, phone pressed to his ear. "Mr. Yamamoto, about the Shanghai projections." Camilla stood alone in their bedroom, surrounded by the trappings of wealth and success. Italian marble, imported silk curtains, artwork that cost more than most people's houses. Everything beautiful, everything perfect, everything cold. She thought about the woman she used to be, before Adrian's indifference had slowly erased her confidence, before she had learned to anticipate his needs while her own went unnoticed, before she had become a supporting character in her own life. Her grandmother's words echoed in her memory. "Baby girl, a man who stopped seeing you never deserved to have you in the first place." Camilla opened her closet and pushed past the row of conservative dresses Adrian approved of. Her fingers stopped on a garment she had bought months ago but never worn, a stunning black cocktail dress that hugged her curves and fell just above her knees. It was elegant, sophisticated, and undeniably attention-grabbing. She had hidden it behind her work clothes, telling herself she was saving it for the right occasion. But the truth was, she had been afraid of standing out, afraid of Adrian's disapproval, afraid of being too much. Tonight, she realized, fear had cost her enough. Camilla pulled the dress from its hanger and laid it on the bed. For the first time in months, she smiled at her reflection as she began to undress. Outside, Adrian's voice carried from his study. "No, the terms are non-negotiable. If they can't accept that, we walk away." How easily he walked away from things that didn't meet his standards. How effortlessly he dismissed what no longer served him. Camilla slipped into the black dress and stood before the mirror again. The woman looking back at her was transformed, confident, radiant, alive. She loosened her hair, letting her natural curls frame her face in soft waves. She swapped her nude lipstick for a bold red that made her smile brighter and her presence undeniable. She was still Camilla Johnson Stone, still the woman who had fallen in love with a man who used to treasure her, but she was also the woman who refused to disappear. The car horn honked outside. Adrian's footsteps approached the bedroom. "Camilla, we need to—" He stopped dead in the doorway, his phone slowly lowering from his ear. For the first time in months, his steel-grey eyes truly saw her. And in that moment, she realized the power she had forgotten she possessed. Would she find the courage to reclaim herself, or would old patterns pull her back into invisibility? Time stood still, and for once, she was the only thing in his world that mattered. Adrian's phone slipped from his fingers, clattering against the marble floor with a sharp crack that echoed through their bedroom. His mouth opened slightly, as if he were about to speak, but no words emerged. He simply stared, really stared, at the woman who had been living in his shadow for months. Camilla felt her heart hammering against her ribs, but she forced herself to stand tall. The black dress hugged her curves like liquid silk, and her natural curls cascaded over her shoulders in waves that caught the soft lamplight. She had forgotten how powerful she could feel in her own skin. "You—" Adrian's voice came out rough, barely above a whisper. "You look different," she supplied, smoothing an imaginary wrinkle from her dress. "Stunning." The word escaped him like a confession he hadn't meant to make. Something flickered between them, a spark of the electricity that had once defined their relationship. Camilla felt it in the way his eyes traveled over her face, her figure, her presence, as if he were seeing her for the first time in years. But the spell was broken by the insistent honking of their driver outside. "We should go," Camilla said, stepping toward him with a confidence that felt both foreign and familiar. Adrian didn't move. His steel-grey eyes remained fixed on her, and she could see the war playing out behind them. Confusion, desire, and something that looked almost like panic. "Camilla, He started to reach for her, then stopped himself. "We need to talk about—" "About what?" she asked, tilting her head. "About how I look fine? About how marriage means we don't need to play games anymore?" His jaw tightened. She was using his own words against him, and they both knew it. The car honked again, longer this time. "The investors are expecting us," Adrian said finally, straightening his tie, a nervous habit she remembered from their early dating days. "Of course they are." Camilla picked up her evening clutch, her movements deliberate and graceful. "We wouldn't want to keep business waiting." As they walked through their penthouse toward the elevator, Camilla caught their reflection in the hallway mirror. They looked like the perfect power couple, he in his expensive suit, she in her stunning dress. But she could see the tension in Adrian's shoulders, the way his usual confident stride had become slightly uncertain. In the elevator, the silence stretched between them like a taut wire. Adrian kept stealing glances at her, and each time their eyes met, he looked away first. "So you changed your hair," he said suddenly. "I let it be natural." She touched one of her curls self-consciously. "The way it was when we first met." "I remember." His voice was softer now, tinged with something she couldn't quite identify. "You wore it like that to our first date, that little Italian place on 5th Street. Camilla's breath caught. He remembered. After months of feeling invisible, forgotten, he still remembered their first date. "You said it was beautiful," she whispered. "It was. It is." Adrian turned to face her fully, and for a moment the walls he had built around himself seemed to crack. "Camilla, The elevator doors opened with a soft ding, revealing their driver waiting beside a sleek black Mercedes. The moment was gone, but its ghost lingered between them as they stepped into the cool evening air. During the 20-minute drive to the Meridian Capitol building, Adrian's phone buzzed constantly with calls and messages, but for the first time in months, he ignored them. Instead, he found himself watching Camilla as she gazed out the window at the city lights streaming past. She was humming softly, something she used to do when she was truly happy. He hadn't heard that sound in so long that he'd forgotten how much he missed it. "What's that song?" he asked. Camilla turned to him surprised. "What?" "The song you're humming." A small smile played at her lips. "You used to know all my songs, Adrian." Before he could respond, the car pulled up to the Meridian building. The 40-story glass tower gleamed against the night sky, its lobby already bustling with elegantly dressed guests arriving for the gala. As their driver opened the door, Adrian stepped out first and extended his hand to help Camilla from the car. When her fingers touched his, he felt that same electric current he'd experienced in their bedroom, stronger now, impossible to ignore. Camilla emerged from the Mercedes like a vision, The city lights caught the subtle shimmer in her dress, and several valets nearby stopped mid-conversation to stare. Adrian noticed their attention immediately, and something dark and unfamiliar twisted in his chest. Possessiveness, jealousy, emotions he hadn't felt in so long that they hit him like a physical blow. "Ready?" Camilla asked, adjusting her clutch. Adrian looked down at her, really looked, and saw not just his wife, but the vibrant, captivating woman who had walked into his life 3 years ago and turned his carefully ordered world upside down. The woman he had somehow allowed himself to take for granted. "Camilla," he said quietly, his hand still holding hers, "before we go in, I need you to know that Mr. Stone," a boisterous voice interrupted them. Richard Meridian, the host of tonight's gala, approached with arms outstretched and a broad smile. "There's the man of the hour, and this must be the lovely Mrs. Stone." Richard's eyes lingered on Camilla a moment too long, and Adrian felt his jaw clench involuntarily. "Richard," Adrian nodded curtly, "thank you for hosting tonight. The pleasure is all mine. Mrs. Stone, you look absolutely radiant. That dress is... wow." Richard's gaze was appreciative, almost hungry. Camilla smiled graciously. "Thank you, Mr. Meridian. What a beautiful venue. Please call me Richard. And if I may say, Adrian is a very lucky man to have such a stunning wife." Adrian's grip on Camilla's hand tightened imperceptibly. "Yes," he said, his voice carrying an edge that made both Camilla and Richard glance at him in surprise. "I am." As they walked into the building, Adrian couldn't shake the image of other men looking at his wife the way Richard just had, the way he should have been looking at her all along. Inside the elevator to the penthouse ballroom, Camilla studied Adrian's reflection in the polished doors. His jaw was set, his shoulders tense, and his eyes held a storm she hadn't seen in years. "Is everything all right?" she asked. Adrian turned to look at her, and in his eyes she saw something that made her breath catch. Raw, undisguised want. "No," he said quietly. "Nothing has been all right for a very long time." The elevator doors opened to reveal a glittering ballroom filled with the most influential people in the city, and as they stepped inside together, Camilla realized that the real test of the evening was just beginning. She had wanted to be seen, but she never expected the chaos that would follow. The Meridian Capitol Ballroom was a masterpiece of elegance. Crystal chandeliers cast dancing lights across marble floors, while floor-to-ceiling windows offered a breathtaking view of the city skyline. The cream of New York's business elite mingled beneath golden accents and fresh white orchids, their conversations a symphony of power and influence. But as Camilla Johnson Stone entered on her husband's arm, the room's energy shifted like a tide pulling back before a wave. Conversations paused mid-sentence. Heads turned. Eyes followed her movement across the threshold with an intensity that made her skin tingle with both excitement and nervousness. She had dreamed of this moment, of being noticed, of commanding attention, of reminding the world that she existed. But now, feeling the weight of dozens of gazes, she wondered if she had underestimated the power she was unleashing. "Mrs. Stone." A deep voice drew her attention to a tall man with silver-streaked hair and kind brown eyes. "I'm James Whitfield, Meridian's Chief Investment Officer. Your husband and I have worked together for years, but this is my first time having the pleasure of meeting you." "The pleasure is mine, Mr. Whitfield," Camilla replied, extending her hand with a smile that felt more natural than any she'd worn in months. James took her hand and held it a moment longer than necessary. "Please, call me James. And might I say you look absolutely exquisite tonight. That dress is remarkable." From beside her, Camilla felt Adrian's posture stiffen. His hand found the small of her back, a gesture that might have looked protective to observers, but felt possessive to her. "Thank you," she said graciously, gently retrieving her hand. "It's wonderful to finally meet Adrian's colleagues." "The oversight is entirely ours," James said with a charming smile. "Adrian has been keeping you far too much to himself. We should remedy that immediately." He gestured toward a group of distinguished men near the bar. "Come, let me introduce you to some friends." As they moved through the crowd, Camilla became acutely aware of the attention she was receiving. Men interrupted their conversations to watch her pass. Women assessed her with a mixture of curiosity and envy. Waiters nearly dropped their champagne trays trying to catch a glimpse of her. At the bar, James's colleagues welcomed her with an enthusiasm that bordered on eager. Thomas Richardson, a hedge fund manager with a boyish grin, immediately offered to fetch her a drink. Michel Duval, a French investor with an accent as smooth as silk, complimented her joie de vivre and asked about her interests outside of Adrian's business world. "I'm actually a graphic designer," Camilla found herself saying, surprised by how good it felt to talk about her own work again. "I freelance for several boutique agencies downtown." "How fascinating." Marcus leaned closer, his interest genuine. "I've always admired creative minds. There's something so alive about people who create beauty from nothing." Adrian's hand tightened on her back. "Camilla's very talented," he said, his voice carrying a warning edge that only she seemed to catch. "I'd love to see your portfolio sometime," Thomas added, his eyes bright with enthusiasm. "My company is always looking for fresh, creative talent." "That's very kind of you," Camilla said, feeling a flutter of excitement she hadn't experienced in years. When was the last time someone had been interested in her work? When was the last time Adrian had even asked about her projects? "Gentlemen," Adrian's voice cut through the conversation like a blade. "If you'll excuse us, I need to speak with my wife privately." The group exchanged glances, clearly sensing the tension radiating from Adrian, but nodded politely as he guided Camilla away from the bar. "What are you doing?" Adrian asked quietly as they moved toward a quieter corner of the ballroom. "What do you mean?" Camilla's eyes flashed with defiance. "I'm having conversations. You know, those things people do at social events. Those men were what? Being polite, showing interest in my work." Her voice remained controlled, but heat simmered beneath the surface. "Treating me like a person instead of an accessory." Adrian's jaw worked silently. Around them, the party continued, but she could feel eyes still tracking their movement, their body language, the obvious tension between them. "You're my wife," he said finally, the words coming out more possessive than he'd intended. "Yes, I am." Camilla turned to face him fully, her dark eyes blazing. "But when was the last time you treated me like one? When was the last time you looked at me the way those men just did?" Before Adrian could respond, a new voice interrupted them. "Mrs. Stone, there you are." Richard Meridian appeared with a champagne flute in each hand, and a smile that was all teeth. "I've been looking everywhere for you. There are some people I absolutely must introduce you to." Richard handed her a glass, his fingers brushing hers deliberately. "The wife of the senator is here tonight, and she's quite taken with your style. She mentioned something about needing a designer for her upcoming campaign materials." Camilla's eyes widened. A political campaign would be a massive opportunity for her career, the kind of break she'd been dreaming of for years. "I'd love to meet her," Camilla said, genuine excitement lighting up her face. "Wonderful. She's just over by the windows with the other ladies." Richard offered his arm. "Shall we?" Camilla glanced at Adrian, who looked like he was fighting an internal war. "Go ahead," he said tightly. "I'll find you later." As Richard led her away, Camilla could feel Adrian's eyes burning into her back. But for the first time in months, she felt alive, vibrant, seen. She was remembering who she used to be. Confident, ambitious, unafraid to take up space in the world. Across the ballroom, she was introduced to Margaret Caldwell, the senator's wife, a sharp, elegant woman in her 50s who immediately appreciated Camilla's eye for design and natural charisma. "Your husband is a lucky man," Margaret said, after they talked for several minutes about potential collaboration. "Beauty and brains, a dangerous combination." Camilla laughed, a sound so genuine it drew looks from nearby guests. "I think I'm the lucky one." But even as she said it, her eyes found Adrian across the room. He was standing with a group of investors, but his attention wasn't on their conversation. He was watching her with an intensity that made her skin flush with heat. For the first time in their marriage, Adrian Stone was seeing his wife as other men saw her, desirable, captivating, and very much in demand. And judging by the storm clouds gathering in his steel-grey eyes, he didn't like the view. "Excuse me, ladies," came a familiar voice. Thomas Richardson appeared beside their group with that boyish grin still firmly in place. "Mrs. Stone, I was hoping I could steal you for a dance." Margaret and the other women exchanged knowing looks. "Oh, you absolutely must dance," Margaret insisted. "The night is young and you look far too beautiful to spend it all standing around talking to us old ladies." Camilla felt her heart skip. A dance. When was the last time she had danced? When was the last time Adrian had even asked her? She looked across the ballroom and found Adrian's eyes immediately. He was no longer pretending to listen to his colleagues. His full attention was on her, and the expression on his face was one she'd never seen before. Raw, desperate, and dangerous. "I'd be delighted," she told Thomas, accepting his offered hand. As they moved toward the dance floor, Camilla could practically feel the heat of Adrian's stare following her every step. Some lines, once crossed, can never be uncrossed. The dance floor gleamed under the crystal chandeliers as Thomas Richardson led Camilla into a classic waltz position. His hand settled respectfully on her waist, while hers rested lightly on his shoulder, and for a moment she felt like she was floating. "You're a natural," Thomas said with genuine admiration as they began to move to the soft jazz melody. "Has anyone ever told you that you light up a room?" Camilla's cheeks warmed at the compliment. "Not in a very long time." "Then they haven't been paying attention." His brown eyes were kind, uncomplicated in a way that made her remember what it felt like to be appreciated simply for existing. "Your husband is a brilliant businessman, but if he doesn't tell you how extraordinary you are every single day, then he's failing at the most important job he has." The words hit her like a gentle blow to the chest. When was the last time Adrian had made her feel extraordinary? When was the last time he'd made her feel anything other than invisible? As they moved gracefully across the floor, Camilla became aware of the attention they were drawing. Other couples had stepped aside to watch, creating a circle around them. She caught glimpses of admiring faces, heard whispered compliments about her grace, her beauty, her presence, but it was the face at the edge of the dance floor that held her attention. Adrian stood frozen by the bar, a crystal tumbler of whiskey gripped so tightly in his hand that she was surprised it hadn't shattered. His steel-grey eyes followed every movement, every turn, every moment when Thomas's hand guided her waist, or when she laughed at something he whispered in her ear. The song was slow, romantic, and as Thomas spun her gently, Camilla's dress flared around her legs like liquid silk. When she came back to him, slightly breathless and glowing with the joy of movement, she caught sight of Adrian again. He had taken a step toward the dance floor, then another. "Your husband looks like he wants to murder me," Thomas observed with amusement, having followed her gaze. "Adrian doesn't dance," Camilla said quietly, though her pulse quickened as she watched her husband's approach. "Maybe he should learn." Thomas's voice carried a hint of challenge as he dipped her gracefully, causing her curls to cascade over his arm like a waterfall. When she came back up, Adrian was there. "May I cut in?" The words were polite, but his voice carried the unmistakable authority of a man accustomed to getting what he wanted. Thomas straightened, his hand still on Camilla's waist. "Of course. Though I was rather hoping to finish the song." "You finished?" Adrian's tone brooked no argument. The tension between the two men was palpable, drawing glances from nearby couples. Camilla felt caught between them, one man who had just reminded her of her own worth, and another who seemed to be remembering it for the first time in months. "Thank you for the dance, Thomas," she said graciously, trying to diffuse the situation. "It was lovely." Thomas lifted her hand to his lips and pressed a gentle kiss to her knuckles, a gesture that was perfectly appropriate, yet somehow felt intimate under Adrian's burning stare. "The pleasure was entirely mine, Mrs. Stone. I hope we'll have another opportunity soon." As Thomas walked away, Adrian stepped into his place without waiting for permission. His hands found her waist and hand, with a familiarity that spoke of years together, but there was nothing comfortable about his touch now. It burned with intensity, possession, and something that felt dangerously close to desperation. "Adrian, don't." His voice was rough as he pulled her closer than the dance required. "Don't say anything right now." The music continued, but their movement was different from her dance with Thomas. Where Thomas had been gentle and respectful, Adrian was consuming. His hand spread across the small of her back, pressing her against him until she could feel the rapid beat of his heart through his shirt. "You're angry," she observed, though her own pulse was racing from his proximity. "Angry?" Adrian's laugh was harsh. "Angry doesn't begin to cover what I'm feeling right now." He spun her with more force than necessary, and when she came back to him, his eyes were blazing. "Do you have any idea what it's like to watch another man hold you, to see you smile at him the way you used to smile at me?" "The way I used to smile at you?" Camilla's voice rose slightly, causing a few nearby couples to glance their way. "When did you stop noticing my smiles, Adrian? When did you stop caring whether I was happy or miserable?" "I never stopped caring." The admission seemed to tear from his throat. "Then why did you stop showing it? Why did you stop seeing me?" Adrian's grip on her tightened as he guided her through a turn that brought them to the edge of the dance floor, partially hidden by a marble pillar. "Because I'm a fool," he said quietly. "Because I thought having you meant I didn't have to keep earning you." The honesty in his voice made her breath catch. Around them the party continued, but in their small corner of the ballroom, the world had narrowed to just the two of them. "You want to know what I'm feeling?" Adrian's voice was barely above a whisper as he leaned closer, his breath warm against her ear. I'm watching every man in this room look at my wife like they want to steal her away, and I'm realizing that I've given them every reason to try." Camilla's heart hammered against her ribs. This was the most emotion Adrian had shown in months, the most present he'd been with her since their early days together. "And what scares me most," he continued, his lips dangerously close to her neck, "is that I might deserve to lose you." The song ended, but neither of them moved to separate. They stood there breathing hard, staring at each other with 3 years of marriage and months of distance crackling between them like electricity. "Adrian," she whispered, his name a question and a plea all at once. Before he could respond, a new voice interrupted them. "Mrs. Stone." Margaret Caldwell approached with a bright smile, completely oblivious to the intensity of the moment she was breaking. "I've been looking everywhere for you. Senator Morrison would like to meet you about the campaign project we discussed." Camilla blinked, trying to refocus on the opportunity that had seemed so important just minutes before. But now, with Adrian's hand still on her and his confession echoing in her ears, everything else felt secondary. "Of course," she managed, stepping back from her husband. "I'd be honored to meet him." As Margaret led her away, Camilla glanced back at Adrian. He stood alone by the pillar, looking more vulnerable than she'd ever seen him. For the first time in months, she saw not the cold businessman who treated her like an afterthought, but the man who had once convinced her to take a chance on forever. Across the ballroom, Senator Morrison was waiting with an extended hand and a politician's practiced smile. But even as Camilla walked toward what could be the career opportunity of a lifetime, her mind remained on the dance floor with her husband. The question that haunted her was simple. Was Adrian's awakening real, or was it just the temporary reaction of a man who didn't want to lose his possession? And more importantly, was she brave enough to find out? Sometimes getting what you want shows you what you've lost. Senator Morrison was everything Camilla had expected from a career politician, silver-haired, perfectly groomed, and armed with a smile that could charm voters and donors alike. But as he shook her hand with both of his, holding it just a moment too long, she felt a flicker of unease. "Mrs. Stone, Margaret has told me wonderful things about your design work. I understand you have quite the eye for visual storytelling." "Thank you, Senator. I'd be honored to discuss how I might contribute to your campaign. Please call me David." His eyes swept over her appreciatively. "And I must say, you're even more striking than Margaret described. Beauty and talent, a rare combination in my experience." Camilla smiled politely, but something in his tone made her skin crawl. This wasn't the genuine professional interest Thomas had shown, or even the respectful admiration of James Whitfield. This was something darker, more calculating. "Your portfolio," David continued, moving closer under the pretense of the ballroom's noise. "I'd love to review it privately. Perhaps we could arrange a dinner meeting, just the two of us, so we can really dive deep into the creative process." The suggestion hung in the air like smoke, and Camilla suddenly understood that this wasn't about her graphic design skills at all. The realization hit her like cold water. This powerful man saw her as another conquest, another beautiful woman to add to what she suspected was a long list. "I think a meeting at your campaign headquarters would be more appropriate," she said firmly, taking a step back. "With your communications team present, of course." David's smile faltered slightly, but he recovered quickly. Of course. Though I find the best creative collaborations happen in more intimate settings, less corporate interference, if you know what I mean." Before Camilla could respond, a familiar voice cut through the space between them like a blade. "Senator Morrison." Adrian appeared beside them, his presence commanding immediate attention. "I was hoping to introduce you to my wife, but I see you've already met." The emphasis he placed on "my wife" was subtle, but unmistakable. Adrian's hand settled possessively on Camilla's lower back, and she could feel the tension radiating from his body. "Adrian, good to see you." David's politician persona snapped back into place. "I was just discussing a potential business opportunity with your lovely wife." "How thoughtful of you." Adrian's voice was perfectly polite and completely dangerous. "Camilla is incredibly talented. I'm sure any collaboration would be professional." The word professional carried enough ice to freeze the champagne in their glasses. David's eyes flicked between husband and wife, clearly recalculating his approach. "Naturally," David said with a laugh that sounded forced. "What kind of man do you take me for?" "The kind who knows better than to mistake politeness for invitation," Adrian replied smoothly. The air between the three of them crackled with tension. Camilla felt caught between her husband's protective fury and a powerful man's wounded ego. A dangerous place to be. "Well," David said after a moment, his smile sharp as glass, I can see you two have things to discuss. Mrs. Stone, do consider my offer. My assistant will be in touch with the details." As the senator walked away, Camilla turned to face Adrian. His jaw was set like granite, and his eyes followed David's retreat with unconcealed hostility. "What was that about?" she asked quietly. "You tell me." Adrian's voice was controlled, but she could hear the storm beneath it. "What exactly did he offer you?" "A potential campaign project," Camilla began, but Adrian's sharp laugh cut her off. "A campaign project? Is that what they're calling it now?" His steel-grey eyes fixed on hers. "Camilla, that man wasn't interested in your design skills." "I know exactly what he was interested in," she said, her own temper flaring. "I'm not naive, Adrian. I handled it. By letting him suggest a private dinner?" Heat flooded her cheeks. "You were listening?" "I was watching. Do you have any idea how many men have approached you tonight? How many business cards you've been handed? How many opportunities you've been offered?" Camilla looked down at her clutch, suddenly aware of the collection of cards and phone numbers she'd accumulated throughout the evening. She had been so intoxicated by the attention, so grateful to feel valued and seen, that she hadn't fully processed the intentions behind some of it. "I wanted to feel important again," she whispered. "I wanted to remember what it felt like to be interesting to someone." The pain in her voice seemed to hit Adrian like a physical blow. His anger deflated, replaced by something that looked like anguish. "You are important," he said roughly. "You're the most important thing in my life. I forgot how to show you that." Around them, the party continued in full swing, but they might as well have been alone. The space between them felt charged with 3 years of marriage, months of neglect, and 1 night of awakening. "Adrian," Camilla started, but was interrupted by yet another approach. "Mrs. Stone." A young waiter appeared beside them with a silver tray. "This was delivered for you." On the tray sat a single red rose and an elegant card. Camilla picked up the note with trembling fingers and read the flowing script. "For a beautiful woman who deserves to be appreciated. An admirer." Adrian's face darkened as he read over her shoulder. "Which one of them sent this?" "I don't know." Camilla's voice was barely a whisper. The rose, which should have been romantic, now felt tainted by the evening's revelations. "Mr. Stone?" Another voice interrupted them. Michel Duval, the French investor from earlier, approached with 2 champagne flutes. "I brought drinks for you and your enchanting wife." Adrian's hand moved to Camilla's elbow, a gesture that was protective and possessive in equal measure. "We were just leaving." "Leaving?" Marcus looked genuinely disappointed. "But the evening is still young, and I was hoping to continue my conversation with Mrs. Stone about her artistic vision." "I'm sure you were," Adrian said coldly. The hostility in his voice was no longer subtle. Michel raised an eyebrow, clearly sensing the undercurrents, but pressing forward anyway. "Mrs. Stone, perhaps lunch tomorrow? I have some connections in the art world that might interest you." "She's busy," Adrian answered before Camilla could speak. "Adrian," Camilla said sharply, embarrassed by his rudeness. "Actually," Michel continued with a slight smile, "I was addressing your wife. I believe she can speak for herself." The challenge hung in the air like a gauntlet thrown down. Adrian stepped forward, and for a moment Camilla genuinely worried that her husband might do something that would end up in tomorrow's gossip columns. "Gentlemen," she said quickly, moving between them, "I think there's been a misunderstanding. Michel, thank you for the offer, but I have prior commitments. Adrian, we should go." She took her husband's arm and guided him away from Michel before either man could escalate the situation further. But as they moved across the ballroom toward the exit, she could feel eyes following them. Some curious, some appreciative, some calculating. At the coat check, Adrian helped her into her wrap with hands that shook slightly. The simple gesture, which he'd performed hundreds of times during their marriage, now felt loaded with significance. "Camilla," he said as they waited for their car, "about tonight." "Don't." She held up a hand to stop him. "Not here. Not now." The ride home passed in tense silence, both of them lost in their own thoughts. Camilla stared out the window at the city lights, thinking about the evening's revelations. She had gotten what she wanted: attention, admiration, proof that she was still desirable and valuable. But the victory felt hollow, tainted by the realization that some of that attention had come with strings attached. More troubling was the way Adrian's possessiveness had both thrilled and frightened her. For months she had craved any reaction from him, any sign that he still cared. Tonight she had gotten more reaction than she'd bargained for. As their building came into view, one question echoed in her mind. In trying to make her husband see her again, had she opened a door that couldn't be closed? The The truth has a way of demanding to be heard, especially in the quiet moments we try to avoid. The elevator ride to their penthouse felt like an eternity. 43 floors of polished steel and uncomfortable silence, broken only by the soft hum of machinery and the sound of their breathing. Camilla stood on one side, Adrian on the other, the space between them charged with unspoken words and unresolved tension. When the doors finally opened to their private foyer, Camilla stepped out first, her heels clicking against the marble floor like a countdown to an inevitable confrontation. Adrian followed, loosening his tie with sharp, agitated movements. Their penthouse stretched before them, 3,000 square feet of luxury that had once felt like a sanctuary, but now seemed like a beautiful prison. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a breathtaking view of the city that never slept. But tonight, even the glittering lights couldn't soften the atmosphere between them. "Camilla," Adrian began, as she moved toward their bedroom. "I need a minute," she said, without turning around, her voice carefully controlled. "We need to talk about what happened tonight." "Do we?" She paused at the threshold of their bedroom, her hand on the doorframe. "Or do you need to lecture me about my behavior, about how I embarrassed you in front of your colleagues?" Adrian's reflection appeared behind hers in the hallway mirror. His usually perfect composure was cracking, his hair slightly mussed from running his hands through it, his tie hanging loose around his neck. "Is that what you think? That I'm embarrassed by you?" Camilla turned to face him, and the raw emotion in her eyes made him take a step back. "Aren't you? Isn't that why you spent the entire evening acting like a caveman, marking your territory? I was protecting you." The words exploded from him with more force than he'd intended. "From what? From people who actually noticed I exist? From men who treated me like I matter? From men who wanted to use you?" Adrian's voice echoed off the marble walls. "Do you think Morrison cared about your design skills? Do you think Michelle was interested in your artistic vision? They saw a beautiful woman and assumed she was available for the taking. And what about you, Adrian?" Camilla's voice was dangerously quiet. "What do you see when you look at me?" The question hung between them like a challenge. Adrian opened his mouth, then closed it, struggling to find words that had come so easily 3 years ago. "I see." He stopped, his hands clenching and unclenching at his sides. "I see my wife. Your wife." Camilla's laugh was bitter. "Not a woman, not a person with her own dreams and ambitions. Just your wife, your possession. That's not what I meant, isn't it?" She moved closer and Adrian could smell her perfume, the same scent she'd worn on their first date, sweet and intoxicating. "When was the last time you asked about my work? When was the last time you cared about my opinions on anything that didn't directly affect your business?" Adrian's jaw worked silently. The truth was he couldn't remember. Somewhere along the way, in building his empire and maintaining his success, he had stopped seeing Camilla as an individual and started seeing her as an extension of himself. "I've been busy," he said weakly. "Busy." Camilla shook her head. "You know what I realized tonight? I've been starving, Adrian. Starving for attention, for recognition, for someone to see me as more than just arm candy or a pretty accessory. And when I finally got that attention, you couldn't stand it. Because it wasn't real." Adrian stepped closer, his voice desperate. "Those men didn't see the woman who stays up until 3 a.m. working on a design because she's passionate about getting it perfect. They didn't see the woman who cries at commercials with dogs in them, or who makes terrible coffee but insists on trying anyway. They saw a fantasy." The specificity of his words caught Camilla off guard. He had been paying attention, at least in some small way. "But you stopped seeing those things too," she whispered. Adrian's face crumpled slightly. "I know. God, Camilla, I know. And I hate myself for it." The admission seemed to take the fight out of both of them. They stood there in their expensive hallway, surrounded by art worth more than most people's houses, and felt poorer than they ever had before. "I used to be someone," Camilla said quietly, sinking onto the velvet bench by their bedroom door. "Before I became Mrs. Adrian Stone, I was Camilla Johnson. I had opinions and dreams and a voice that mattered, but somewhere in the last 3 years, I lost her." Adrian moved slowly, as if approaching a wounded animal, and sat beside her on the bench. The space was small enough that their knees almost touched, but the emotional distance between them felt vast. "Tell me about her," he said softly. "What?" "Camilla Johnson. Tell me about her. What did she want? What made her laugh?" Camilla looked at him in surprise. When was the last time he'd asked her a question about herself that wasn't related to his schedule or social obligations? "She wanted to design album covers for independent musicians," Camilla said slowly. She had this crazy dream of creating visual stories that would make people feel something just by looking at them. She used to spend hours in record stores, studying cover art and imagining what she would do differently. Adrian nodded, encouraging her to continue. She laughed at terrible puns and cried at sunsets. She collected vintage postcards from places she'd never been and made playlists for every mood. She believed that love was supposed to be a partnership, not a performance. Her voice broke slightly on the last words, and Adrian felt something twist painfully in his chest. "She sounds incredible," he said quietly. She was, but she got lost somewhere between wedding planning and charity galas, and learning how to be the perfect CEO's wife. Camilla looked down at her hands, still adorned with the wedding ring that had once symbolized forever. "I became so focused on being what you needed that I forgot who I was. And I let you disappear." Adrian's voice was rough with self-recrimination. "I was so consumed with building our life that I forgot to actually live it with you." They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of their mutual failures settling between them like fog. "Adrian," Camilla said finally, "what are we doing? What are we to each other anymore?" The question hung in the air, demanding honesty neither of them was sure they were ready to give. "I don't know," Adrian admitted, "but I know what I want us to be." "What's that?" He turned to face her fully, his steel-grey eyes intense with an emotion she hadn't seen in months. "I want us to be the couple who dances in the kitchen at midnight. I want us to be the people who argue about movies and then make love until we forget what we were fighting about. I want to be the man who deserves you, not the one who takes you for granted." Camilla felt tears prick at her eyes. "And what if it's too late? What if we've hurt each other too much to find our way back?" Adrian reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and touched her face gently. "Then we learn how to hurt better. We learn how to fight for each other instead of against each other." The touch of his fingers against her skin sent electricity through her entire body, a reminder of the passion that had once defined them. "I miss you," she whispered. "Even when you're right here, I miss you." "I'm here now," Adrian said softly. "Really here. And if you'll let me, I want to spend every day earning my way back to you." Camilla closed her eyes, leaning into his touch despite the voice in her head warning her to be careful. "I don't know if I can trust you not to disappear again." "Then don't trust me yet. Make me prove it." When she opened her eyes, she saw something in his face that she hadn't seen in so long she'd almost forgotten it existed. Vulnerability. The great Adrian Stone, master of the universe, was sitting before her with his heart on his sleeve, asking for a chance to love her properly. But before she could respond, the sound of her phone buzzing broke the moment. A text message lit up the screen. "Thank you for a magical evening. I hope this is just the beginning. T." Adrian's eyes flicked to the phone, and his jaw tightened imperceptibly. The spell was broken, and reality came crashing back. Trust, once broken, must be rebuilt one choice at a time. The phone sat on the marble bench between them like an unexploded bomb. Thomas's message glowed on the screen, innocent words that somehow felt loaded with dangerous possibility. The magical evening he referenced seemed to mock the fragile moment of connection that Camilla and Adrian had just shared. Adrian's hand slowly pulled away from her face, and Camilla watched his walls begin to rebuild themselves in real time. The vulnerability that had softened his features just moments before was hardening back into the controlled mask she knew so well. "Don't," she said quietly. "Don't what?" His voice was carefully neutral, but she could see the storm brewing behind his steel-grey eyes. "Don't retreat. Don't assume the worst. Don't let one text message undo everything we just shared." Adrian gestured toward the phone. "He's already planning your next meeting, Camilla. Just the beginning. What exactly does that mean?" "It means he enjoyed talking to someone who listened to him." Camilla picked up the phone and, without hesitation, deleted the message. There. Gone. The simple action seemed to surprise Adrian more than any words could have. He had expected her to defend Thomas, to make excuses, to choose the attention over their marriage. Instead, she had chosen him. "Just like that?" he asked. "Just like that?" Camilla turned to face him fully. "Because whatever Thomas thinks happened tonight, whatever he imagines might happen in the future, he's wrong. You're my husband, Adrian. For better or worse, that still means something to me." Something shifted in Adrian's expression, relief mixed with disbelief, as if he couldn't quite trust that she was choosing their marriage over the excitement of new attention. "But," Camilla continued, and Adrian tensed again, "I need you to understand something. Those men tonight, they saw me. They valued my opinions, my work, my presence. They made me feel like I mattered. And if you want me to choose you over that feeling, you have to give me a reason to. What kind of reason? Camilla stood up, suddenly needing space to think clearly. She walked to the floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the city, her reflection ghost-like against the glittering lights below. I want you to know me again, she said to his reflection in the glass, not just as your wife, but as Camilla. I want you to care about my dreams, my work, my thoughts about things that have nothing to do with your business or our social obligations. Adrian stood and moved behind her, close enough that she could feel the heat of his body, but not quite touching. Tell me how. Start small. She turned to face him. Ask me about my day and actually listen to the answer. Look at my portfolio, really look at it, and tell me what you think. Notice when I change my hair or wear something new. Remember that I hate mushrooms and love terrible reality TV shows. You watch reality TV? Adrian's eyebrows rose in genuine surprise. Despite everything, Camilla laughed. See? You don't even know that about me anymore. I binge-watch dating shows while you're working late. I have opinions about which couples will last and which ones are just there for Instagram followers. A small smile tugged at Adrian's lips. That's actually really cute. It's also really me. The real me that you stopped noticing when I became Mrs. Stone. They stood there looking at each other, and for the first time in months, Camilla felt like Adrian was truly seeing her. Not the polished version she presented at business dinners, but the woman who cried at commercials and watched trashy TV and still believed in love despite everything. What about tomorrow? Adrian asked quietly. What about it? I have meetings all day, but they can be moved. We could spend the day together. Just us. No business calls, no social obligations. You could show me your latest projects and I could remember how to be the man you fell in love with. The offer was so unexpected, so unlike the Adrian who had prioritized work above everything else for months, that Camilla felt her walls begin to crack. You would really cancel your meetings. The Yamamoto deal can wait. The Singapore acquisition can wait. Everything can wait. Adrian stepped closer, and this time she didn't move away. You're more important than any of that. I forgot how to show you that. The admission hung between them, honest and raw, and more vulnerable than anything he'd said all night. Okay, Camilla said softly. Okay, tomorrow we try again. But Adrian, she placed her hand on his chest, feeling his heartbeat beneath her palm. If you disappear on me again, if you go back to treating me like furniture, there won't be another chance. I won't let myself become invisible again. You were never invisible to me, Adrian said fiercely. Ignored, yes. Taken for granted, absolutely. But never invisible. You're the most beautiful, most brilliant woman I've ever known, and I'm a fool for letting you forget that. The intensity in his voice made her breath catch. This was the Adrian she had fallen in love with. Passionate, focused, completely present when he chose to be. Then prove it, she whispered. Adrian leaned down slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away. When she didn't, when she actually leaned into him, he pressed his lips to hers in a kiss that was both familiar and completely new. It was nothing like the perfunctory pecks they'd exchanged over the past months, polite gestures performed out of habit rather than desire. This kiss was hungry, desperate, full of 3 years of love and months of neglect and 1 night of rediscovery. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard. I should change, Camilla said, suddenly aware that she was still wearing the dress that had caused such chaos at the gala. Don't. Adrian's voice was rough. Not yet. I want to look at you in it for a few more minutes. I want to remember how you looked tonight when you took my breath away. Heat flooded Camilla's cheeks. I took your breath away? You always take my breath away. I just stopped telling you. Adrian reached out and touched one of her curls, wrapping it around his finger. I want to relearn everything about you. Your expressions, your gestures, the way you bite your lip when you're concentrating. I do not bite my lip when I'm concentrating. You're doing it right now. Camilla's hand flew to her mouth, and Adrian's laugh was warm and genuine, a sound she had missed more than she'd realized. See, I still know some things about you. I just need to start paying attention again. They stood there in their hallway, surrounded by the trappings of wealth and success, and for the first time in months felt rich in the ways that actually mattered. What happens now? Camilla asked. Now we go to bed, Adrian said, and at her raised eyebrow he quickly added, to sleep, just together. I want to hold you tonight, if you'll let me. No expectations, no pressure. I just want to remember what it feels like to have you in my arms. The request was so simple, so basic, and yet it felt monumental. When was the last time they had gone to bed together rather than at different times? When was the last time he had held her for the sake of holding her rather than as a prelude to perfunctory sex? "Okay," she said again. As they prepared for bed, Adrian removing his suit with careful precision, while Camilla finally changed out of the dress that had started it all, there was a new awareness between them. Not the comfortable familiarity of long marriage, but the charged anticipation of two people choosing to trust each other again. When Camilla emerged from the bathroom in her silk pajamas, she found Adrian already in bed, waiting for her. He had turned off all the lights except the soft glow from the city outside, and in the dim illumination, he looked younger, more vulnerable. She slipped into bed beside him, and when he opened his arms, she settled against his chest for the first time in what felt like forever. The steady beat of his heart beneath her ear was familiar and comforting, a rhythm she had missed without realizing it. "Thank you," Adrian whispered into her hair. "For what?" "For giving us another chance. For choosing me tonight, even though I haven't deserved it." Camilla tilted her head to look at him. "Don't make me regret it." "I won't. I promise you, Camilla, I won't." As they lay there in the darkness, holding each other cautiously, like two people learning to trust again, one question echoed in both their minds. Would morning bring the man who had held her so tenderly? Or would daylight restore the distant stranger she'd been living with for months? Only time would tell if Adrian Stone was truly ready to fight for the woman he'd almost lost. The morning after promises are made is when love proves if it's real or just beautiful words in the dark. Camilla woke slowly, consciousness creeping in like sunlight through silk curtains. For a moment she felt disoriented. There was warmth against her back, a steady rhythm of breathing that wasn't her own, and an arm draped protectively around her waist. It took her a few seconds to remember that Adrian had kept his word from the night before. He had simply held her, nothing more, nothing less. She lay still, afraid to move and break whatever spell had kept him there through the night. In the soft morning light filtering through their bedroom windows, last night felt almost like a dream. The gala, the dress, the confrontation, and finally, the tentative steps toward each other. Behind her, Adrian stirred, his arm tightening around her reflexively, before consciousness caught up with him. She felt the exact moment he became fully awake, his body tensed slightly, as if he too was surprised to find himself still there, still holding her. "Good morning," he said quietly, his voice rough with sleep and something that sounded like wonder. "Good morning." Camilla turned in his arms to face him, and her breath caught. Rumpled from sleep, his dark hair messy, and his usual perfect composure absent, Adrian looked more like the man she'd fallen in love with than he had in months. "I wasn't sure you'd still be here," she admitted. Adrian's brow furrowed. "Where else would I be? Conference call with Singapore. Emergency meeting about the Yamamoto deal. Some crisis that required your immediate attention." The words came out more bitter than she'd intended, but they were honest. Pain flashed across Adrian's features. "How many mornings have I left you like that?" "Too many to count." He was quiet for a moment, processing the weight of her words. "Not today. Today, the only crisis that matters is us." As if summoned by their conversation, Adrian's phone began buzzing insistently on the nightstand. The display showed his assistant's name, Sarah Chen, along with a series of missed calls and urgent text messages. Camilla watched Adrian's face carefully, looking for the telltale signs that he was about to choose work over her again. His eyes flicked to the phone, and she saw the familiar tension begin to creep into his shoulders. "Go ahead," she said quietly. "Answer it." "What?" "Your phone. Answer it. I know you want to." Adrian stared at her for a long moment, then reached over and turned the phone face down on the nightstand without looking at the messages. "No," he said firmly. "Whatever it is can wait. I made you a promise last night, and I intend to keep it." The gesture was so unexpected, so contrary to months of conditioning, that Camilla felt tears prick at her eyes. "Adrian, if it's really important, you're really important." He cupped her face gently. "You're the most important thing in my life, and I'm done acting like you're not." His phone buzzed again, more insistently this time. Adrian reached over, switched it off completely, and tossed it into the nightstand drawer. "There," he said with a slight smile. "Problem solved." Despite herself, Camilla laughed. "Your board of directors might disagree." "The board of directors doesn't keep me warm at night or make terrible coffee that I pretend to enjoy. The board of directors didn't marry me and promise to love me through better and worse." Adrian's thumb traced her cheekbone. "You did." The simple words hit her harder than any grand romantic gesture could have. This was what she'd been missing, not just attention or affection, but the feeling of being chosen, of being prioritized. "What do you want to do today?" she asked. "Everything. Nothing. I want to make you that terrible coffee you mentioned. I want to see your latest designs. I want to hear about the reality TV shows you've been watching. I want to learn how to be your husband again instead of just the man you happen to live with." The sincerity in his voice made her chest tight with emotion. "That might take a while. I have time." They lay there talking quietly for another hour, really talking, not the surface-level exchanges they'd grown accustomed to. Adrian asked about her current projects, and to her surprise he listened intently as she described the branding package she was developing for a small local bakery. He laughed when she told him about the reality show contestants she'd been rooting for, and he looked genuinely interested when she mentioned wanting to take a photography class. "Photography?" he asked. "Since when?" "Since always, kind of. I've been thinking about it more lately, how visual storytelling could enhance my design work, but it seemed—" She trailed off. "Seemed what?" "Frivolous, expensive, self-indulgent." Adrian propped himself up on his elbow to look at her better. "Camilla, when have I ever made you feel like your interests were frivolous?" The question hung in the air, and Camilla realized that he hadn't. Not directly, but somewhere along the way, in trying to be the perfect wife for a successful businessman, she had started policing her own dreams. "It's not what you said," she admitted. "It's what you didn't say. When was the last time you asked me what I wanted, what I was dreaming about, what would make me happy?" Adrian's face fell. "I don't know. Neither do I. That's the problem." They were quiet for a moment, the weight of lost opportunities settling between them. "Tell me now," Adrian said suddenly. "What? Tell me what you want, what you're dreaming about, what would make you happy." Camilla studied his face, looking for signs that this was just another empty gesture, another promise he wouldn't keep, but his steel-grey eyes were focused entirely on her, waiting. "I want to take that photography class," she said slowly. "I want to travel somewhere just because it's beautiful, not because you have business there. I want to design something that matters, maybe album covers like I used to dream about, or campaign materials for causes I believe in. What else? I want us to cook dinner together instead of ordering from the same 5 expensive restaurants. I want to go to movies that don't have subtitles and aren't about war or politics. I want to sleep in on Sunday mornings and watch terrible TV in our pajamas." Adrian smiled. "That all sounds perfect. I want you to want those things too, not just tolerate them because they make me happy. I do want them." Adrian's voice was soft but certain. "I want them more than I've wanted anything in a long time. I forgot how to want simple things. I got so caught up in the next deal, the next acquisition, the next goal that I stopped noticing the life I was supposedly building all of it for." As if to test his resolve, his phone in the drawer began buzzing again, a muffled but insistent sound. "You sure you don't want to check that?" Camilla asked, watching his face carefully. Adrian didn't even glance toward the nightstand. "Positive. Today is about us. Tomorrow we can deal with whatever crisis my assistant thinks can't wait. What if it really can't wait? Then someone else will handle it. I've built a company full of brilliant people specifically, so I don't have to be involved in every decision. It's time I started trusting them to do their jobs, so I can focus on mine, which is being your husband, being worthy of the woman who chose to love me despite all my faults." Camilla felt something loosen in her chest, a tension she'd been carrying for so long she'd forgotten it was there. "I do love you," she said quietly. "Even when I didn't like you very much, I still loved you. That's what made it hurt so much. I love you too, more than I ever learned how to show you." Adrian leaned down and kissed her forehead gently. "But I want to learn. Will you teach me?" "It's not something you learn from a book, Adrian." "Then teach me anyway. Show me how to love you the way you deserve to be loved." The request was so humble, so different from the commanding CEO she'd grown accustomed to, that Camilla felt her last wall crumble. "Okay," she whispered. "But we start with coffee. Real coffee that we make together, not from the machine your assistant installed." Adrian's smile was brighter than the morning sun streaming through their windows. "Deal, but you have to promise to tell me when I inevitably mess it up." "Oh, you'll definitely mess it up. Thanks for the vote of confidence." "But," Camilla continued, her own smile blooming, "I'll show you how to fix it." As they got out of bed together, moving toward their kitchen and the promise of a shared morning, neither mentioned the phone that continued to buzz in the drawer. For the first time in months, the world outside their penthouse would have to wait. Today belonged to them. True love isn't tested in the quiet moments. It's proven when the world demands you choose. The coffee was terrible, just as Camilla had predicted. Adrian stood in their marble kitchen, staring at the dark liquid in his mug with a mixture of bewilderment and determination, while Camilla laughed so hard she had tears in her eyes. "I followed the instructions exactly," he protested, though his smile betrayed his amusement at the situation. "You followed them like a business contract," Camilla said, wiping her eyes. "Coffee isn't about precision. It's about feel, about intuition. I don't do intuition." "I know. That's what makes this so entertaining." They were both still in their pajamas at 11 a.m., Adrian in simple grey cotton pants and a white t-shirt that made him look younger and more approachable, Camilla in silk shorts and one of his old college shirts that hung loose on her frame. The sight of her in his clothes did something to Adrian's chest, made him remember mornings from their early relationship when she would steal his shirts and make coffee that was just as bad as what he'd produced today. "Let me show you," Camilla said, moving to stand beside him at the expensive espresso machine that had been gathering dust since his assistant had installed the automated system in his office. As she guided his hands through the process, measuring coffee by sight and sound rather than strict measurement, adjusting the grind by feel, Adrian found himself more focused on her than on the lesson, the way she bit her lower lip when concentrating, just as he'd mentioned the night before, the way she hummed softly under her breath, the way she fit perfectly against his side when she leaned close to show him something. "See? It's about reading the coffee, not commanding it," she said as they waited for the machine to work its magic. "Everything in my life responds to commands. I don't." Camilla looked up at him with eyes that sparkled with mischief and challenge. "I never have." "No," Adrian agreed, his voice soft. "You never have. Maybe that's why I fell in love with you." The words hung between them, simple and honest, and so different from the calculated phrases he'd used during their courtship. This wasn't the polished businessman who had swept her off her feet with expensive dinners and carefully chosen words. This was just Adrian, rumpled and uncertain and completely present. The coffee machine finished with a soft hiss, and Camilla poured 2 cups of what turned out to be genuinely good coffee. "Better?" she asked. Adrian took a sip and nodded appreciatively. "Much better, though I think the teacher had more to do with that than the student. Practice makes perfect." "Is that what we're doing, practicing?" Camilla considered the question seriously. "I think we're remembering who we were before we became so careful with each other." Before Adrian could respond, a sharp knock at their front door interrupted the moment. It was aggressive, insistent, not the polite tapping of their building's concierge or the gentle knock of a neighbor. "Are you expecting someone?" Camilla asked. "No," Adrian frowned, setting down his coffee mug. "The front desk should have called if someone was coming up." The knocking came again, more urgent this time, followed by a voice they both recognized. "Adrian, I know you're in there. We need to talk, now." Richard Meridian, the host of last night's gala, and more importantly, one of Adrian's biggest investors. What was he doing at their home on a Saturday morning? Adrian and Camilla exchanged glances. The peace of their morning suddenly felt fragile, threatened by whatever crisis had driven Richard to their door. "I should probably," Adrian began. "Mr. Stone." Richard's voice was louder now, tinged with something that sounded like panic. "The Singapore deal collapsed. Yamamoto pulled out completely. We need to discuss damage control immediately." Adrian's face went pale. The Singapore acquisition wasn't just important. It was the cornerstone of his expansion strategy for the next 5 years. If it had truly collapsed. "Adrian," Camilla said quietly, seeing the familiar tension creep back into his shoulders. I know I said today was about us, but this is important. This is everything. If the Singapore deal is really dead, it could trigger a domino effect. Other investors might pull out. The Meridian partnership could be in jeopardy." The knock came again, even more insistent. "Adrian, my board is meeting in 2 hours. If we don't have a response by then, I have to answer it," Adrian said, and Camilla could see the war playing out on his face. "I'm sorry, I know what I promised, but..." "Then answer it." Adrian looked at her in surprise. "What?" "Answer the door. Handle the crisis. Do what you need to do. But our day will still be here when you're finished." Camilla reached up and straightened his hair, which was still mussed from sleep. "This is who you are, Adrian. You're a man who builds empires and solves impossible problems. I fell in love with that man too. You're not angry. I'm not angry." And surprisingly, she meant it. The old Camilla would have been furious, would have seen this as proof that he would always choose work over her. But something had shifted. Maybe it was seeing him turn off his phone that morning, or the way he'd listened to her dreams about photography, or simply the fact that he was asking instead of assuming. "But," she continued, "when you're done handling this crisis, I want you to come back to me. Really come back. Not the version of you that's still thinking about Singapore or worried about the next deal. I want the man who just spent an hour learning to make coffee." Adrian pulled her close and kissed her hard, pouring 3 years of love and months of regret and 1 morning of hope into the contact. "I'll come back," he promised against her lips. "I swear to you, I'll come back. I'll be here." Adrian opened the door to find Richard Meridian looking harried and desperate, a far cry from the polished host of the previous evening. His usually perfect hair was disheveled, his expensive suit wrinkled, and his eyes held the wild look of a man watching his empire crumble. "Thank God," Richard breathed. "Adrian, we have a problem, a big one." "Come in," Adrian said, stepping aside. "Tell me everything." As Richard launched into the details of the collapse, Yamamoto's sudden withdrawal, the panic among other investors, the emergency board meeting, Camilla retreated to the kitchen to give them privacy. But she could hear every word, could feel the familiar energy of crisis management filling their penthouse like smoke. "It's not just Singapore," Richard was saying. "Morrison's campaign is asking questions about our stability. Word is spreading that we're overextended. If we don't act fast, this could destroy everything we've built." Camilla leaned against the kitchen counter, still holding her coffee mug, and watched her husband transform. Gone was the rumpled man in pajamas who had laughed at his terrible coffee. In his place stood Adrian Stone, CEO and master of the universe, his mind already working through solutions and contingencies. "What about the Johannesburg alternative?" Adrian asked, his voice sharp and focused. "We explored that option 6 months ago. Dead end. Their government changed the foreign investment laws last quarter. Dubai? Possible, but the timeline would push us back 18 months. Camilla set down her mug and walked toward the window, looking out at the city where countless other couples were probably enjoying lazy Saturday mornings. For a moment, she allowed herself to imagine what it would be like to be married to someone whose idea of a crisis was running out of milk or disagreeing about what movie to watch. But even as the thought crossed her mind, she dismissed it. She had married Adrian Stone, all of him, the driven businessman and the tender husband, the empire builder and the man who forgot to eat when he was working on a big problem. The question wasn't whether she could accept both sides of him. The question was whether he could learn to balance them. "Mrs. Stone?" Richard's voice interrupted her thoughts. "I'm sorry to intrude on your weekend like this." "It's fine, Richard. Crisis doesn't keep regular hours. You're very understanding. I know Adrian mentioned how important today was supposed to be for you both." Camilla glanced at her husband, surprised. "He did?" "Oh yes. He was quite clear about it when he refused to take my calls this morning. Said today was about his wife and everything else could wait." Richard looked between them with curiosity, though obviously some things can't wait. The revelation that Adrian had been fielding calls and refusing them, protecting their morning even as his business world began to collapse, hit Camilla like a physical blow. He had known this crisis was building and had chosen her anyway, for as long as he possibly could. "How long do you need?" she asked Adrian. "I don't know. The board meeting is in less than 2 hours, but depending on what we decide, take what you need," Camilla said firmly. "Save your empire. I'll be here when you're done." Adrian looked at her with such gratitude and love that her heart ached. "Are you sure?" "I'm sure, but Adrian." "Yeah? When this is over, we finish our conversation about photography classes, and tomorrow we sleep in and watch terrible reality TV." Adrian's smile was brilliant. "Deal." As the 2 men disappeared into Adrian's study, closing the door behind them, Camilla was left alone in their kitchen with 2 cups of coffee and the lingering taste of hope. She had a choice to make. She could be angry about the interrupted morning, could let resentment build the way it had so many times before, or she could choose to see this differently. Adrian had fought for their morning until he literally couldn't anymore. He had turned off his phone, ignored his calls, and prioritized her until the crisis became too big to handle alone. And most importantly, he had asked her permission instead of simply disappearing. For the first time in months, Camilla felt like a partner instead of an afterthought. Through the closed study door, she could hear Adrian's voice, sharp, authoritative, completely in control as he worked to save his business. This was the man she had fallen in love with, the one who could see solutions where others saw only problems. The question was, would he remember to come back to her when the crisis was over, or would success pull him back into the old patterns that had nearly destroyed them? Only time would tell, but for the first time in a long time, Camilla found herself believing that love might actually be enough. In the end, love isn't about perfect moments. It's about choosing each other when everything else falls apart. Hours passed. The sun moved across the sky, casting different shadows through the penthouse windows as Camilla waited. She could hear Adrian's voice through the study door, sometimes calm and strategic, sometimes sharp with frustration, occasionally rising to what she recognized as barely controlled anger. At one point, she heard him shout, "That's completely unacceptable," so loudly that she was certain their neighbors could hear him through the walls. Whatever was happening in Singapore, it was worse than a simple deal falling through. Camilla had spent the afternoon trying to distract herself, organizing her design portfolio, answering emails from potential clients, even researching photography classes online. But her attention kept drifting to the closed door, and the man behind it who was fighting to save everything he'd built. At 4:30, her phone rang. Thomas Richardson's name appeared on the screen. She stared at it for a long moment, remembering the text from the night before, remembering the way he had looked at her during their dance, remembering the choice she had made to delete his message. The old Camilla, the one who had felt invisible and undervalued, might have answered. She might have welcomed the distraction, the attention, the reminder that someone found her interesting. But that woman felt like a stranger now. Camilla declined the call and turned her phone face down on the counter. 20 minutes later, it rang again. This time it was Michel Duval, the French investor who had been so charming at the gala. Again, she let it go to voicemail. When Senator Morrison's number appeared on her screen at 5:15, followed immediately by a text reading, "We should discuss that project privately. Are you free this evening?" Camilla turned off her phone entirely. The irony wasn't lost on her. Yesterday, she would have been thrilled by such attention. Today, all she wanted was for her husband to emerge from his study and remember that she existed. At 6 o'clock, the study door finally opened. Richard Meridian emerged first, looking exhausted but relieved. Adrian followed, his hair disheveled, his face drawn with fatigue, but his eyes bright with the satisfaction of a problem solved. "Mrs. Stone," Richard said, extending his hand to her, "thank you for your patience today. I know this wasn't how you planned to spend your Saturday." "Did you fix it?" Camilla asked. "We did better than fix it," Richard said with a tired smile. "Adrian found a solution that turns the Singapore collapse into an opportunity. We're restructuring the entire Asian expansion around a partnership with Korean investors who actually offer better terms than Yamamoto ever did." Camilla looked at her husband, seeing the familiar glint in his eyes that appeared whenever he had outsmarted a seemingly impossible situation. "Of course you did. It's not final yet," Adrian said, but she could hear the satisfaction in his voice. "We have calls with Seoul starting at 7 a.m. tomorrow, but the framework is solid." "Congratulations," Camilla said, and meant it. "Both of you." Richard gathered his papers and headed for the door, but paused before leaving. "Adrian, the Korean team wants to finalize everything by Tuesday. That means we'll need you in the office tomorrow, probably most of the weekend." Camilla felt her heart sink. Of course. Of course there would be more meetings, more calls, more reasons why their time together would have to wait. "Actually," Adrian said quietly, "they'll have to wait until Monday." Richard stopped. "What?" "The framework is done. The preliminary agreements are in place. Whatever details need to be worked out, my team can handle them. I'm not going into the office tomorrow." "But Adrian, this is the biggest deal we've ever, and it will still be the biggest deal we've ever made on Monday morning." Adrian's voice was firm, final. "I made a promise to my wife and I intend to keep it." Richard looked between them, clearly struggling to understand how Adrian could possibly prioritize anything over the deal that had just saved their company. "If you're sure, I'm sure." After Richard left, Camilla and Adrian stood in their foyer, looking at each other across the space that felt both familiar and charged with new possibility. "You really meant it," Camilla said softly. "About what?" "About choosing me. About coming back." Adrian moved toward her slowly, as if approaching something precious and fragile. "Did you doubt it?" "A little. Old habits, I guess." "I understand why." Adrian reached for her hands, and she let him take them. "For months I've been giving you every reason to doubt me, to doubt us. But you didn't today. Even when everything was falling apart, even when Richard needed you to work tomorrow, you chose me." "I chose us," Adrian corrected gently, Because I finally realized that none of the rest of it matters if I lose you. Camilla felt tears prick at her eyes. Adrian, let me finish. Please. Adrian's hands tightened on hers. Today, while I was in that room fighting to save my business, all I could think about was you. Not the money, not the reputation, not the empire I've built. Just you, waiting for me to remember what's actually important. Your business is important too. I understand that now. It is, but it's not everything. It's not even the most important thing. Adrian released her hands and cupped her face instead. You are. You're the reason I built all of this in the first place, to give you a life worthy of the woman you are. But somewhere along the way I forgot that the life I was building was supposed to include actually living it with you. The words hit her like a physical blow, beautiful and painful, and exactly what she had needed to hear for so long. I love you, she whispered. Even when I didn't think I could survive loving you anymore, I never stopped. I love you too, more than I ever learned how to show you. Adrian leaned his forehead against hers. But I want to learn. I want to spend the rest of my life learning how to love you better. Even if it means terrible coffee and reality TV. Especially if it means terrible coffee and reality TV. Camilla laughed through her tears. And photography classes? And photography classes. And lazy Sunday mornings and cooking disasters. And whatever else makes you happy. What makes me happy is you, the real you, not the perfect CEO version. The man who gets frustrated with coffee makers and works too hard and loves me even when he's terrible at showing it. Adrian kissed her then, soft and sweet and full of promise. When they broke apart, both were breathing hard. I have a confession, Camilla said. What? 3 men called me this afternoon. Thomas, Michelle, and Senator Morrison. They all wanted to see me. Adrian's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. And I didn't answer a single call. I turned off my phone and waited for my husband to remember that he loves me. The relief that flooded Adrian's face was so profound that Camilla realized he had been carrying more fear than he'd let on. Why? He asked. Because last night taught me something important. I don't want to be desired by men who see me as a conquest or a distraction. I want to be loved by the man who sees me as his partner, his equal, his choice. You are all of those things. I know that now. But Adrian, I need you to know them too. Really know them. Not just say them when you're afraid of losing me, but remember them on Tuesday morning when the Korean investors want your attention. Remember them when the next crisis hits and Richard is pounding on our door. I will, Adrian said fiercely. I swear to you I will. Camilla studied his face, looking for the signs of empty promises or temporary resolve. Instead, she saw something she hadn't seen in months. Certainty. Not the arrogant certainty of a man who expected to get his way, but the quiet certainty of a man who had made a choice and intended to keep it. Okay, she said simply. Okay, I believe you. Okay, let's try again. Okay, I choose you too. Adrian's smile was brilliant, transforming his face from the tired businessman back into the man she had fallen in love with 3 years ago. So what happens now? He asked. Now you keep your promise about tomorrow. We sleep in, we make terrible coffee together, and we figure out how to be married to each other instead of just living in the same house. And after that, we figure out the rest as we go, together. Adrian pulled her close, holding her tight enough that she could feel his heartbeat against her chest. I like the sound of that. Good, Camilla said, settling into his arms with a contentment she had forgotten she could feel. Because you're stuck with me, Adrian Stone. For better, for worse, and for all the terrible coffee in between. Best deal I ever made, Adrian murmured into her hair, and for the first time in months, Camilla believed that it truly was. Outside their windows, the city continued its relentless pace. Deals being made, empires being built, people choosing ambition over love or success over happiness. But inside their penthouse, 2 people who had almost lost each other were choosing something different. They were choosing love, real love. Complicated, imperfect, daily choice love that would require work and patience and the courage to keep choosing each other, even when it wasn't easy. It wouldn't be perfect. There would be more crises, more late nights, more moments when the world demanded their attention. But they had learned something valuable. Love wasn't about never facing challenges. It was about facing them together. And as they stood in their home holding each other and planning their tomorrow, both Camilla and Adrian knew that they were finally ready to build something better than an empire. They were ready to build a life. 6 months later, love isn't a destination. It's a journey you choose to take together, one morning at a time. The kitchen smelled like burnt toast and too strong coffee, and Camilla had never been happier about a culinary disaster in her life. "I still don't understand how you managed to burn toast," she laughed, watching Adrian scrape charcoal flakes into the garbage disposal with the intense concentration he once reserved for billion-dollar deals. "It's a gift," Adrian replied with a self-deprecating smile. "Some people are naturally talented. I'm naturally talented at destroying breakfast." Camilla moved behind him, wrapping her arms around his waist and pressing her face against his back. He was wearing an old NYU t-shirt and pajama pants, the Saturday uniform they had established over the past 6 months. His hair was still messed up from sleep, and there was a coffee stain on his shirt from their earlier attempt at synchronized coffee making. He was perfect. "Good thing I love you anyway," she murmured against his shoulder. "Just anyway?" Adrian turned in her arms, his steel-grey eyes sparkling with the playfulness that had become a regular part of their mornings. "Not because of my exceptional breakfast skills? Definitely in spite of them." The ease between them still felt like a miracle sometimes. Not because it was effortless. They had both learned that love required daily effort, daily choices, daily recommitment, but because it was possible. 6 months ago, this kind of playful morning had seemed as distant as the moon. Now it was simply Saturday. Their kitchen table was covered with the evidence of Camilla's latest project, contact sheets from her photography class, design mock-ups for the campaign she was working on, not Senator Morrison's, but for a young congresswoman who actually cared about her creative input, and the half-finished crossword puzzle that had become their Sunday tradition. "Show me the photos from yesterday," Adrian said, settling into his chair with a fresh cup of coffee that was only slightly terrible. Camilla reached for the contact sheets, but her smile faltered slightly. "They're not very good yet. I'm still learning." "Camilla," Adrian's voice was gentle but firm. "Show me." The tone was one she had learned to recognize over the past months, the voice of a man who was genuinely interested, not just being polite. It had taken time for her to trust it, to believe that his questions about her work came from real curiosity rather than marital obligation. She spread the contact sheets across the table, images from her assignment to capture moments of connection around the city. There were couples sharing coffee in Washington Square Park, children playing in Prospect Park, an elderly man feeding pigeons with intense concentration. "This one," Adrian said immediately, pointing to a shot of 2 business people on the subway, both looking at their phones, but somehow still managing to lean into each other. "It's perfect." "Really?" Camilla studied the image with new eyes. "I thought it was too candid, too unposed. That's what makes it perfect. You captured something real." Adrian looked up at her with the same expression he wore when he'd solved a particularly complex business problem. "You have an incredible eye, you know that." The compliment hit her differently than they used to. 6 months ago, Adrian's praise had felt like consolation prizes, nice words meant to make her feel better about herself. Now she could hear the genuine admiration in his voice, could see that he was actually studying her work with the same attention he gave to things he truly cared about. "My instructor wants me to submit this series to a gallery showing next month," Camilla said, still not quite believing it herself. "That's amazing. Are you going to do it?" "I'm thinking about it. It's competitive, and I've only been doing this for 6 months. "Camilla," Adrian reached across the table and took her hand. "Stop making excuses for your talent. You're brilliant at this, and you deserve to be in that show." The confidence in his voice bolstered her own. This was what she had been missing for so long. Not just support, but genuine belief. Adrian wasn't encouraging her photography because he thought it was a nice hobby for his wife. He was encouraging it because he truly believed she was good at it. "Okay," she said, squeezing his hand. "I'll submit it." "Good. And I want to be there on opening night, front and center, telling everyone that my wife is the most talented photographer in New York. You might be slightly biased, completely biased, unapologetically biased." Adrian brought her hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles gently. "I'm proud of you, not because you're my wife, but because you're you." The words still had the power to make her breath catch. 6 months of hearing them hadn't made them feel routine or expected. If anything, they felt more precious, because she knew how easily they could have been lost. Adrian's phone buzzed on the counter, a sound that used to make them both tense with anticipation of the next crisis. Now Adrian glanced at it briefly, then returned his attention to her photographs. "Aren't you going to check it?" Camilla asked. "It's Saturday. The only emergency I'm interested in is whether we're out of the good coffee." The response was so automatic, so natural, that Camilla almost missed the significance of it. But she remembered too well the months when every buzz, every call, every email had taken precedence over whatever they were doing together. What if it's really important? Adrian looked up at her with a slight smile. Then it will still be important on Monday. I learned something from a very wise woman. The most important deals happen right here at this table. He wasn't wrong. In the past 6 months, they had negotiated the terms of their new life together over breakfast conversations and late-night talks. They had hammered out agreements about work-life balance, about supporting each other's dreams, about the kind of marriage they wanted to build going forward. It hadn't always been easy. There had been moments when Adrian slipped back into old patterns, when the demands of his business threatened to overwhelm their carefully constructed boundaries. There had been times when Camilla struggled with trust, when she caught herself waiting for him to disappear again. But they had learned to catch themselves, to call each other out, to choose their marriage over their fears. I have something for you, Adrian said suddenly, reaching into the drawer of the kitchen table. It's not my birthday. It's not a birthday present. He pulled out a small wrapped package, simple brown paper tied with string. It's a 6 months of not screwing up our marriage present. Camilla laughed despite herself. That's quite a milestone. The most important one I've ever achieved. She unwrapped the package carefully, revealing a vintage Polaroid camera, not expensive or flashy, but clearly chosen with thought and care. For when you want to capture moments that don't need to be perfect, Adrian explained. Just real. Camilla turned the camera over in her hands, feeling the weight of it, the solidity. It was exactly the kind of gift she hadn't even known she wanted, something that supported her passion without trying to make it more serious or professional than it needed to be. I love it, she said softly. But more than that, I love that you understand why I would love it. I'm learning. Slowly, but I'm learning. We both are. Adrian stood up and moved to the window, looking out at the city that sprawled beneath their penthouse. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if you hadn't worn that dress to the gala. You would have kept ignoring me, I would have kept disappearing, and we would have ended up divorced within a year, Camilla said without hesitation. Probably. Adrian turned back to her. Thank you for being brave enough to demand more. Thank you for not giving up on us before I figured out how to fight for us. Thank you for learning how to fight for us, instead of just expecting us to exist. They looked at each other across their kitchen, this space that had become the heart of their rebuilt marriage, and Camilla felt the same flutter in her chest that she'd experienced on their first date. Not the desperate, hungry love of new romance, but something deeper and more sustainable. The love of two people who had chosen each other not just once, in a moment of passion, but every day since, in moments of ordinary life. What do you want to do today? Adrian asked. It was a question he asked every Saturday now, and it never failed to make her smile. Not what do we have planned or what are our obligations, just what do you want to do? I want to take pictures in Central Park with my new camera. I want to find a terrible diner and eat pancakes that are definitely not on your trainer's approved list. I want to come home and watch that reality show you pretend to hate, but actually get invested in. The one where they put strangers in a house together. You know their names, Adrian. Stop pretending you don't care whether Brittany ends up with Jake or Tyler. Tyler, Adrian corrected automatically, then looked embarrassed. I mean, I don't care, I just happened to notice you're adorable when you're caught caring about trashy TV. I'm a serious businessman. I don't care about trashy TV. Right. That's why you yelled at the screen last week when Jake picked Stephanie for the date. Adrian's attempts at maintaining his dignity crumbled into laughter. Okay, fine. I may have developed some investment in their romantic journeys, but only because you explained the strategic elements of the game. Everything's a business deal to you. Everything except this. Adrian gestured between them. This is something better than a deal. This is a partnership. The word settled between them, warm and solid and exactly right. Not romance, though there was plenty of that. Not just love, though love was the foundation. Partnership. The daily choice to build something together, to support each other's dreams, to create a life that made both of them better than they were apart. Partners, Camilla agreed, raising her coffee mug in a mock toast. Partners, Adrian echoed, clinking his mug against hers. They spent the morning exactly as Camilla had requested, wandering through Central Park while she experimented with the Polaroid, finding a tiny diner in the village where the pancakes were enormous and the coffee was somehow even worse than Adrian's homemade attempts, and finally settling on their couch to watch beautiful people make questionable romantic decisions on television. I still think Jake is making a mistake, Adrian said, as the credits rolled on the latest episode. You said that about his last 3 choices. Because he keeps making mistakes. He's thinking short-term attraction instead of long-term compatibility. Camilla curled closer to her husband, resting her head on his shoulder. Sounds like someone I used to know. Hey, I figured it out eventually. Yes, you did. She tilted her head to look at him. Only took you 3 years of marriage and one very dramatic dress. Worth every moment of confusion. The late afternoon sun slanted through their windows, casting golden light across their living room. In a few hours, Adrian would probably check his email, and Camilla would work on editing the photos from her morning shoot. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to choose each other over the easier path of taking each other for granted. But right now, in this moment, they were exactly where they belonged. Together, imperfect, deeply in love, and finally smart enough to know how lucky they were. Camilla, Adrian said softly. I love you. Not because you're beautiful or talented or because you make me a better person. I love you because you're you, and you choose to be you with me. She lifted her head to meet his eyes, seeing in them the same depth of feeling that had drawn her to him 3 years ago, but tempered now with the wisdom of two people who had almost lost everything and chosen to fight for it instead. I love you too, she said simply. All of you. The empire builder and the man who burns toast. The CEO who saves companies and the husband who chooses me over conference calls. I love all of it because it's all you. As the sun set over Manhattan, painting their penthouse in shades of gold and amber, Camilla Johnson Stone and Adrian Stone settled into another evening of their rebuilt life together. They had learned that love wasn't about perfect moments or grand gestures. It was about showing up day after day, choice after choice, for the person who had chosen to show up for you. And in the end, that was the greatest empire they had ever built together. What does true partnership in a relationship mean to you? Is it about grand gestures or daily choices? Your participation means a lot to the channel. Please share your thoughts in the comments. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, leave a like and comment your thoughts. Your participation is very important to us. See you next time.